Good morning, lesbians who tech and allies. I'm from San Francisco, and I'm really happy to be here. Who else? Yeah. All right. So I am a futurist. I'm a futurist for Capital One. I'm Capital One's first futurist. You might be asking, what does a futurist do? And that's a really good question. So I look out 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the future at emerging trends, at drivers of change, at shifts in the marketplace, and I say, how do I use those to create a variety of different scenarios that then we can bring back to the present and say, how do we make better decisions right now? So for Capital One, we tend to look at positive futures. We look at futures we really want to create. What kinds of experiences can we create for our customers that we can start building now? But I don't always work for Capital One. I actually have a side gig too, which is actually what I'm going to talk to you about today. And that's with the Army. So I work at the Army Cybwer Institute, and I'm part of a threat casting lab between the Army Cybwer Institute and Arizona State University. And what we do is look not at the positive futures that we want to create, we actually look at the futures we really, really want to avoid for our nation. So, as a little teaser as to what we do, let me share with you a science fiction prototype that we wrote last May in a work session in Tempe, Arizona. And this was all around the use and misuse of artificial intelligence, or AI. So come with me for a second. We're going to jump to 2027. And we're going to talk about Dr. Lei Lin. And Dr. Lei Lin, when she was a little girl, maybe some of us can align with this, she really liked to take care of the stray cats in Taipei. Well, when she grew up to be a doctor, no one was surprised in her family to hear that she wanted to take care of the poorest populations. And so she actually went into rural Taiwan to take care of the villages outside of Taipei. Because she had no funding and she had no support staff, she actually used an AI support staff to help her keep updated with the medical industry, as well as help diagnose these tricky and unusual patients that she would see. So one rainy Wednesday, I'll step backwards. One rainy Wednesday in 2027, she was looking at a patient of hers, a young woman who was exhibiting symptoms of GI disease. And she typically would prescribe one of two common medicines, but this time, her AI support staff prescribed something different. And it's the first time in her 2 years working in Taiwan that she disregarded the AI and went with her expertise. Later that night when she got to her hotel room and her apartment, she was really bothered by this. She said, why was the AI wrong? It had been clearly wrong. It had been clearly wrong in something that was very simple that she'd done before. So what caused this? Had it been wrong before? Had she just not noticed it? Was someone behind this, misinformation? So this was a short story about Lei Lin that is entirely feasible, and it's all around how we are increasing our dependence on AI support staff in an autonomous world. And if those trusty AIs are then hacked, what happens if the decisions we think are trustworthy are no longer trustworthy? How do we start doing that? So, how do we create this scenario? In the threat casting lab with the Army, we use a process like this. What we do is use data points in the present. So we use social inputs, we use technical inputs, we use drivers of change and trends, and we use data with an opinion around a particular topic area. So this topic area for the last May work session was around the use and misuse of AI. And then using all those data inputs, we create a science fiction prototype like the one I just shared with you. Essentially, we tell a story about what might happen. And that story then becomes a vision for a possible future. Once we have that vision, then we start bringing it back to the present. Because it's not useful just to say, oh, this might happen. We have to figure out, what do we do about it? And when we bring it back to the present, we uncover one event. And the event for this story was the back-end hacking of a medical AI that could target a particular population, which is pretty scary. And then we say, okay, we've got an event. How can we start discussing how to mitigate, disrupt, or recover from that event? And this discussion was all around how do we build in backdoor systems into autonomous actors so that we can maintain a modicum of control as humans in this increasingly autonomous world. So we talked about that with Army Cybwer Institute. And why do we do this? We're working with the military, we're working with people, and people like stories. We are storytelling beings. We like to align our world with stories about how it relates to us, how things relate to us. So that's what we do at the Threat Casting Lab. We create stories about a person in a place with a challenge. And that story helps us bring a little bit more tangibility into the threats that we uncover, into some of the really scary things that we're talking about. And this is not a new framework. Who reads SciFi in the room? Anyone? Yes. SciFi nerds. I'm reading a good one right now. Ask me about it later. So SciFi's been used for a long time. We all know this. Minority Report was used to kind of prompt heads-up displays that was created after the fact, and they're actually now in market. But way before Minority Report happened, science fiction was used to look at science in the real world, in the present, along with emerging trends, to look at what threats might be possible. So way before Einstein thought about an atomic bomb, H.G. Wells wrote a novel about it. It's called 1914's The World Set Free. And in it, he knew nothing about nuclear detonation, but he did know a little bit about radioactive decay. And he thought, okay, if we can manage to blow up a lot of this stuff, it would make a really big bang. And that's what he wrote about, and he was right. A little closer to our time, one of my favorite books, Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson, outlines, oh yeah, I've got one fan, yes, outlines a bunch of different technologies, including nanotechnologies, these little microscopic smart devices that can be inhaled, injected, otherwise inhabit our bodies, but we don't really know if they're good for good or if they're for ill. And so right now, nanotechnologies are being trialed and used in the medical industry, which is super cool, but also brings in my mind an idea about hackability. How do we protect our thoughts, or our feelings, or our identities if our brains are connected to the cloud? So I don't tell you this to scare you, although I kind of do a little bit, because it's fun. But I do tell you this to start broadening our horizons about what we can think about as possible visions, and then how do we tell those through stories? How do we make them real and tangible so we can actually start thinking about them in tangible terms? So, I just did this. Yesterday and the day before, I was in DC with 90 professionals in government, military, academia, industry, private citizens, some people that choose not to use their real names. True story. I had to look at their name tags to see what they wanted to be called that day. And we modeled new threats, and this was all around AI use in agriculture infrastructure in America. So we modeled threats around what might happen if the agricultural industry is one of the highest adopters of early technology in farming. What happens if those are hacked? So we do this twice a year. We change coasts, and we model and update our threat models for the Army Cyber Institute in order to figure out what do we need to focus on in the next 6 months to 10 years? How do we keep our information current? So I couldn't synthesize from yesterday and tell you all the threats quite yet, but I do want to share 3 threats we came up with last May in our work session in Tempe. And these 3 threats are actually in a report that is being launched publicly, which is the first time ever that a government threat casting report is being launched publicly, going to print on Monday, going to online on Tuesday, so check it out. 3 threats. The first one is the new dogs of war. So AI will become a weaponized system in and of itself. It won't just be used to guide drones or missiles. It will actually become a weapon in and of itself to circumvent security systems and instigate nefarious actions. So think about what happens when that corrupts our energy grids or our power grids or our water supplies. AI weapons factories, unlike nuclear weapons, which have very specific componentry, AI for weaponized use or for the newest gaming device has the exact same componentry. So how do we track who's making weaponized AI and who's making a super awesome game that we're all going to go try next week? You can't, and it's probably decentralized. So how do we track that? It's a huge problem that we're going to be tackling. And finally, careless destabilization of national security. So this is really all about if we do not, as America, start bringing in experts to create true AI, which has not been created yet, another nation will. If that other nation's cultural norms do not align with what we think is right for America, guess what? That's going to be a huge military disadvantage for us. Also a huge economic disadvantage for us, with ripple effects internationally. So we need to be first to market with true AI, or there's going to be huge ramifications we are not prepared for. Okay, that was really dark, but we do this because we want to paint an image of many different futures. There's not just one future out there. So we need to paint images of many different positive futures like we do for corporate America. We also need to paint pictures of negative futures so that we can inform the Army Cyber Institute to say, hey, we don't want these futures to happen. What do we need to do right now to make sure that those possible negative futures do not become reality? So that's what we do. I am not the only person that can think about the future. Yes, I am a futurist, but everyone in this room is capable about thinking about the future. So if you have an idea about what crazy, weird future is possible, if you want to be part of these work sessions, I need more women and more queer women to come and be with me in these work sessions. It's like, yes, please. It's like 90 white old dudes, and I swear to So come find me if you want to be involved. I would love to bring you in. What we need to do is just model more diverse futures in order to make our present a little bit more actionable and make the change we want to see in the world. So thank you guys. Come find me. See you soon.